Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. On this week's episode, Susan and Julia join me to discuss the NACAC conference in Baltimore that occurred in late September, a gathering of 7,000 admissions professionals and college counselors of all stripes, and they'll share what workshops they thought were most helpful. Lisa and I will take on a Speakpipe question, and we'll be looking at whether it's better to take a course online, pass-fail, or have it count toward your GPA. We'll have the final part of my interview with Ron Lieber, the lead money columnist for the New York Times, and we're talking about tough questions about paying for college. And friends, we're giving our team a break for a week on spotlights, as we love doing spotlights, but they're a lot of work, and all of us counselors are working here with November deadlines, so we're going to take a little time off on spotlights, but of course we will return to them. Friends, I want to apologize in advance for our audio quality in the news segment. We use 2 different professional services, which are considered the best in the business, Zencastr and Squadcast, and both failed us this time. We had tech issues and had to go to Zoom, and there's a real drop-off in audio quality, especially on Julia's audio. But hopefully the content will make it worth it for you to tolerate our subpar audio. Now, when I met with Julia and Susan, we never had a tip in admissions vernacular and a big number. And so I'm going to add that here for you today. Okay, for our tip. Now, I'm going to be a little sneaky here. Let's say you have a really high SAT or a really high ACT score, and a school is test-free, score-free, test-blind, meaning they cannot see your scores at all. But you obviously would like for them to see it. So here's the tip. If a school allows a resume upload, have your 1580 and your 3536 ACT on there. We always say it's very hard to unsee a bad number. Well, it's also very hard to not see a really good number as well. Sneaky, yes, but what does the Bible say? Be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. Okay, admissions vernacular. And our term is whole person admissions. This is just another term for holistic admissions, and in my opinion, it's a better term. Holistic admissions, what is that? It sounds so esoteric, so arcane. Whole person admissions is at least somewhat self-explanatory. You're factoring in many of the aspects of who an individual is besides whether they have the metrics, the numbers. Okay, and our big number. I said last week with Vince that I'm going to draw 5 big numbers off of that article that we discussed about colleges spending a whole boatload of money. And the first one is $800,000. What is that? The University of Kentucky has spent more than $800,000 per day on their physical plant, on facilities. Guess what? For over a decade. And you wonder why the cost of college continues to rise. Friends, I am very, very excited today because we just realized Julia, Susan, and I have never done a podcast together. It's a first for everything. And we have Julia Esquivel and Susan Tree together here to talk about NACAC, the annual conference of admission officers. 7,000 people get together and talk about all things admissions. And so I'm excited. Each of us selected 2 topics that jumped out at them. Julia, why don't you kick it off with the one you want to talk about first and give a bit of a overview about why you thought this was a beneficial session. And Susan, I'll just ask you a few questions.
Sure. Well, full disclosure too, I also sometimes select sessions based on people I might have worked with before or as well. So both sessions I went to that I want to talk about, I really thought the presenters did such a great job.
Excuse me, Julie, I just thought about something. I should probably give a little background. So this was in Baltimore. This
Yes.
was in Baltimore, September 22nd through 24th, I believe.
20th through the 24th. Yep.
20th to you can come early and go on college tours, which I know both of you got on some college campuses as well. So I was at my mom's 85th, so I meant to miss it this year, but I'm in Los Angeles next year.
Yay.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
All right. Go ahead, Julie. Sorry about that.
No, great point. I got to see Johns Hopkins, which I'm ashamed to say when I lived in the Mid-Atlantic, I actually never went and visited. So I was glad I did that. So and kudos, by the way, to everyone who organized the conference. I thought for such a big group, it was really well organized. And maybe my favorite was that all of the volunteers working the event had these crab hats. So which I got one. I'm very excited about. But so
Baltimore crab, for those of you who didn't get that, there's an association there.
Keep it the theme. So one of the sessions I went to that I really enjoyed was about sort of the partnership or collaboration for a student who might have a school-based counselor, a independent counselor, or outside college counselor, and then working with an admissions officer at the college. So sort of the three sort of people that might be supporting or helping the student. It was interest to me because I'm a school-based counselor and I work a lot with IECs or independent education consultants, often, including all the folks part of this podcast. And I was also really interested in ways that we could talk about not doing double duty, and that two people are doing kind of the same work or different work and then pulling the student in the wrong directions, maybe between the two different sets of advice, but also then what is the role of the school-based counselor in the IEC in supporting the student when interacting with colleges? So I know that you might have all seen this before for the folks that are on the podcast with me, but it was the folks presenting. One was Yvonne Espinoza, who is also, she used to be a public school-based counselor and is now an IEC. And then Shannon Berrylow, who is at a independent school in Louisiana, and then Mike Keaton, who's the VP of enrollment at Ursinus. So the three of them sort of talked about their own sort of interactions as well, and sort of just being mindful and being ethical, but also just thinking a lot about oftentimes the students who go to an independent school and have a school-based counselor will also have an IEC. And so making sure that we all collectively don't take up too much space, so that for students who might not go to an independent school and have a college counselor or might not have an IEC is getting similar access to college admission officers as a student in that situation. So got to see a contract about what an independent school who might say, like, do you need an IEC? And then they have a very frank conversation with families, not anti-IEC at all, but just sort of, here's what we can provide. And that if there is more than this that you are looking for, then maybe you do want an IEC, and also how to go about selecting one that will support the student in ways that are sort of aligned with the mission and the goals of the college process at that particular independent school. And then sort of rights and responsibilities about the school-based counselor and the IEC when it comes to interacting with colleges and then the rest of the college process. So, and colleges vary. I realize and also learned from this, and that some are very happy to invite IECs on a counselor tour or collaborate with them. And so the spirit of the whole session was really about, like, how do we collaborate better rather than just, do we even talk about collaboration? So I really enjoyed that session.
Yeah. And listeners may or may not know this, but this is a really, really complicated question, right? Like,
yes.
Like I actually think it's more complicated than early decision. There's a lot of different reasons why in the past communication has broken down
Mm.
on both sides. I like to give the example of when I'm talking to families about this, about you're a teacher, let's say you're a history teacher in your school, and then all of a sudden your principal comes to you and says, I have some great news for you. You're going to get to co-counsel this year. We're putting another teacher in your classroom. That's probably not going to be well received, right? Because now there's another voice and you got coordination and collaboration. And what if you're not on the same page? And in the past, sometimes, Jill and I talk about this stuff all the time. You've had IECs, some mom gets her, has a kid get in Prestige U and they hang their shingle and they're giving your kid bad advice that's contradicting you. Mm-hmm. There's also times you have very unique knowledge only at the school that may contradict. There's also tension with the colleges. I remember having lunch with a senior level person at Stanford about why they don't work with more IECs. Mm-hmm. And he says, even if we wanted to, do you realize what like the New York Times would do with something like that? They'll be all over that. They'll find the most expensive one out there and say Stanford has private meeting with IEC that charges $250,000, and they'll run with that, right? And so there's like just we're going to look like we're privileging the privileged. It's going to look like it doesn't, with our access mission. So there can also be some resentment because you have me as a school counselor for free and you're going to pay for somebody else. What am I, chopped liver? There's just been constant tension. And I know I work with a lot of students that are in independent schools. So the conversation comes up all the time. How are you going to communicate with my counselor? And there's all kinds of different models out there. Mm-hmm. There's some people like one of our friends, Julia and Susan, former Haverford admission officer. She's very welcoming to do that. Julia and I built our relationship with, me having students at Milton and working collaboratively with others. But then I've also had people say, I can talk to you, but nobody else in our office is probably going to want to talk to you, Mark, And so, but then, I'm not talking about some of the negatives, but then also the IEC can maybe be available to do a 9 p.m. session or work over the summer in a way that the school counselor is not going to do. Or sometimes the family just wants a voice outside of the school perspective. So there's the value of the school perspective because you might have inside knowledge on your relationship with this school and past history. But then some people just feel like it's really helpful to get an outside perspective versus evidence. So it's a really complicated topic. And people have really different philosophies on how open they are. There are some school counselors that welcome that communication. Some have policies. If you work with an IEC, then I'm out. You're on your own.
Right.
And so this is not a one size fits all thing. And so I'm curious, Julia, like was that addressed? The fact that people are going to have very different just willingness and openness to even do anything. And some of it's based on whether it's been a positive experience in the past or they've been burned.
Absolutely. Yes. And unfortunately, that's sort of even how the session went, where there was this really great sort of presentation. And then a lot of feelings bubbled up in the question and answer portion, where it sort of did end up devolving back to that central question. So yes, everyone is different. I think what I found was really helpful is that when the school-based counselor or counseling office has a very clear policy that makes sure that the student is not disadvantaged by choosing to work with an IEC. And so Shannon Barrio, also her contract I really liked a lot, which basically said, you are on your own, but here's what our responsibility is. It is that we need to represent you to the colleges. And so you, on your end, you need to make sure that you are doing as much as you can with interacting with us when it comes to letting us know who you are. So if there's a brag sheet that the office distributes to students, that is as in-depth and well done as possible, that the student is bringing themselves to maybe some meetings, but maybe they're not talking about a college list or essays or anything like that. But that way, when the school-based counselor writes the letter of recommendation, which is generally required at most colleges, that it's almost as if the student worked, very closely with the school-based counselor the whole time. So that way the student might get, everything they need from the IEC that they would have also gotten from the school-based counselor, but no one's doing double duty. Right. And the school-based counselor has done a really good job supporting the student. Probably my favorite point, and I this is something that I think about a lot, is for my students who might have learning differences, especially or executive functioning challenges, is that I have, even though it's a small caseload compared to public schools, I actually am not, first of all, not trained, nor am I really great at being able to have these really consistent check-ins, maybe change the way that we're doing the process to better suit a learning style. And that is often where an IEC might really come in handy. I once partnered with an executive functioning coach who also did college counseling, and we had this really great relationship about what was I going to do and how could that IEC support me. So as much as we don't have a policy in my school, we don't love it all the time. But I think that the point was, if you're willing to kind of lean in and maybe have a quick meeting with the IEC, that you might find a fit that works best for your school and the student as well.
Susan, what are your thoughts? You and I have talked about this topic so many times, and you've really been in all roles. I mean, you know what it's like to work with students independently. You know what it's like to be a school-based counselor. You know what it's like to be an admission officer. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, and I'm so grateful to hear Julia's thoughts, because, in the profession, as when I was school-based for so many years, beginning in the early 90s at Westtown, I had so many bad experiences with IECs and there was such a groundswell of reaction against them professionally. And it was finally NACAC, the National Professional Association, that said, listen, let's get these people, let's form some kind of credential. So we can, rather than try and marginalize them professionally, that may seem like what we are doing now, but it's not going to last. The industry is growing. Let's at least give them standards that will carry some weight in their work with families and in their work with colleges. And that's where we've come so far. I think there still are a lot of Lone Ranger IECs out there who have no regard for the national professional standards, and our professional associations also are no longer guiding us the way that they used to. But I personally had so many bad experiences with IECs basically wanting my information and then peddling it to a family as their own. So they didn't have my background, they didn't know my school history. They wanted, at our school, Mark, we had very, very few, because you knew I was a hardliner against IECs. At a boarding school, friends, it's a waste of money and time. If you're paying big bucks to send a child to a school like Milton or Westtown or another great boarding school where the kids have tremendous access to high quality professional teaching and counseling, unless the student is refusing to engage and the family gets to a summer and says, we're in deep trouble here, then, great, go figure it out. But to try and hold a school-based college counselor's wisdom of many years of relationships with colleges and the predictability of those long-term relationships, the whole idea of a second opinion, okay, but don't expect a lot of collaboration. I don't know if I was still in a school that I would be as open-minded as Julia, but my generation is passing. They're retiring, and the next generation feels a lot more open-minded because that's been their history, their experience. So
I think there's another thing too. If somebody is going to be talking to your student, it's nice to know what they're saying. Right. And so that you're not surprised. Oh, you're recommending a different college than me? Oh, it's nice to do that. And it can work actually really, really well. Like I've had conversations where I can think of one where the school was like, this student has no chance at Georgetown. Okay, I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm not going to tell the kid that because the family's going to freak out, but they have no chance, and they want to go restricted early action at Georgetown. Mark, could you help me with that? And then I come in and do what I need to do, and we collaborate and do that, and we build up likelies in that. The other thing that I will say, one of the biggest reasons why people work with an IEC from places like Chode and others is that there's this thing in boarding schools where people want to start in January the junior year. That doesn't work for a lot of people. I mean,
Not
you're
anymore.
away at boarding school and you already can't take your kid anywhere. And that whole process has changed. People want to start this process earlier.
Right.
And a lot of the boarding schools, even some of the most brand names of the brand names, are working off of this. We'll start in January thing of the junior year. I mean, when I work with my students, I want you to have almost everything done by September, going into the school year. And there's no way you can do that. How can you even visit to get a list?
Right.
So that's something that until boarding schools start addressing that, they're going to have tons of people going to IECs because I know I work with a lot of people that I don't agree with what you said, Susan. I work with people at those leading schools and they find value and their siblings come back and they start much earlier and they travel and we can do it in a way where it works for the boarding school. Because one thing that everybody struggles with is kids having unrealistic lists.
Right.
And one thing every counselor wants is someone who has a balanced list, who realizes how selective it is out there, that's got some good probables and likelies on their list. And a lot of times that I see that as my role. I'm going to have to educate you on how highly selective it is. And I'm going to have to build that list. And then when they come, and they go into their IEC meeting, if you're doing it right, they go into their school-based counselor meeting, the counselor's going to really like this list. Now, one thing that there has to be respect for the school counselor. So you always have to say things like, you have to understand your school might have special knowledge of a relationship. And if your counselor is telling you they really think you should look at this school, I'm going to tell you, I want you to look at that. I think a lot of it is how you position the school counselor too. There's got to be that respect for they're the one. If there's a counselor call, it's going to be with them. If there's a letter, it's with them, and they might have special school knowledge. But I think that's, one thing Stephen Antonoff said when I talked to him about this, and he's somewhat considered almost the modern founder of the modern movement. He started the courses. He's like, we have to be doing something right. Look at the growth of the profession. The growth of the profession has blown up. People don't pay money for something they don't feel is working. And the profession has exploded because people find value to it. So anyway, I don't want to make this all about this session.
Yeah,
we have three more.
And I don't know, Mark, if I agree with you on the finding value. I think a lot of it is affluent families keeping up with the Joneses. I'm a native New Yorker. My family's in New York City. I know what's going on there. And every kid, whether they're at a private school or at a high-end public school in major metro markets now, they have academic coaches, they have athletic trainers, they have sports recruiting coaches, they have a team, they have, they have a handler, and I think the school-based college counselor becomes just another voice in the crowd. And a lot of us, that's what we struggled with because we're the only ones with the school history. We're also, and here I am saying I don't work in a school anymore.
Well, you had about 27 years, Susan, so that's not going to go away.
But, I could pick up the phone and call anybody. And while it got increasingly hard to talk to certain admissions counselors, I could get hold and get through to pretty much an admissions person at any school I needed to talk to and have a heart to heart. And I think that's speaking of what were the takeaways from the NACAC conference, the profession's changed and I'm not kicking and screaming. Look at me. I work independently now, but, and I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. I'm working with a family right now, an international family. And this is actually in my 5 years of doing this since I left my school, the first time this has happened, where they are pitting my list against the school, the independent international schools list. And
Right.
I just said to them the other day, I said, you have to believe your school counselor.
Right.
I said, I gave you the best of my
Yeah.
knowledge. I'm honoring the very strong preferences you have. I've given you a strategy. But if your school counselor said you don't have a snowball's chance. Now,
Yeah.
what I also don't know is how strong that school counselor's recommendation is going to be for your child. I don't
Yeah.
say those words because
Mhm.
I think that's
You don't
putting
want to
in
settle.
there.
No, because then you
yeah,
run the risk of them thinking, "Oh, I didn't get in because the counselor
because
didn't
yeah,
advocate strongly." Now I'm mad at the school counselor. So you can't do
exactly. And
that.
I have too much
Yeah.
respect for that person who's
Sure.
trying to level with
Sure.
this family. What the school counselor is saying is, I have 5 earlies this year to, ED1 to University of Chicago. And
Sure.
when they read these applications, you're probably going to be number 5.
Yeah.
And that I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, I think, yes, but I have a very unhappy feeling about how this is playing out. Luckily, I don't take it personally now,
hmm
but I'm going to help every family. I wish the only independent clients I worked with were Matchlighter scholars or public school kids who don't have any guidance.
Right. But
Because
that's not true. People come
yeah.
to you from those schools
But
because these are people
yeah.
that believe in education. They believe in it and they're going to do every single thing for their kid and they have the
Yeah.
resources.
I agree. And I think that it's teaching me a little bit of a lesson about who I accept as
Mhm.
someone I want to work with. They have other choices and,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
very interesting point. Our listeners can tell that there's strong feelings all over the place on this.
Yeah, and I actually think some of our best conversations are when we disagree. One other point. Some school-based counselors don't work over the summer. And some will even refer to outside college coaches because they don't work over the summer. And you're actually helping them out. And that's true for boarding schools and private day schools. Most of them also aren't going to meet a counselor at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday or a Sunday night. And that may be very appealing or convenient for a family. But, Susan, and the cool thing is I have history with both of you guys. So we've had these conversations many times on all angles, ways we can't even get into in this, in today. But I actually like disagreeing because we all respect each other and we know there's different points of view. And people can think through it how they want and come to their own conclusions. I wish we had more time to talk. I would love to talk the whole time about this, but we have 3 other exciting topics. Susan, why don't you introduce the things that jumped out from you about the conference?
Well, and actually we just alluded to it because, a couple of years ago, the Justice Department took the National Association for College Admissions Counseling to task over a number of the principles of good practice that were written into the Statement of Principles of Good Practice, which had been revised into the a code of ethical practices. Anybody who's listening who belongs to a profession knows that one of the definitions of a profession is a kind of self-regulating code of ethical behavior. And that whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit profession, that there always is some kind of governance body made of members. This is more characteristic of not-for-profit organizations, but also at for-profit organizations, where there's a membership body that creates an ethical code and usually professional development experiences that support that behavior. And then also that they provide some benefits to people in the profession who are members and who subscribe in some way, either by earning professional development, what would we call it? Points, credits. Teachers certainly have to do that constantly to keep their license updated. But there are some benefits to being associated with an organization that takes the higher moral road and has some form of self-governance. For quite a few years, I was a member of our regional NACAC's admissions practices committee. And I was responsible for hearing violations of the ethical code that were brought by mostly high schools in our region, where they felt that colleges were out of line and were using unethical recruiting practices, persuasion practices, incentives, and were simply not behaving in the students' best interests. So that was not fun, actually, although I learned a lot by having to make connections. The issue I had to deal with, which was providing incentives to a student to apply to a binding early decision program. That was against the rules. The college had to withdraw that behavior from their practices, and because it was not in the student's best interest. So anyway, the Justice Department took on that particular issue and decided that the Code of Professional Standards was actually a violation of antitrust regulations. So anyway, the association now no longer has a self-governance body and no longer has a code of an enforceable or a self-regulatory code of ethics. And that's where I'm seeing the big changes, Mark and Julia, that there are behaviors now where everyone's referring it to as the wild, wild west, that there are behaviors now that pretty much anything goes in recruiting and incentives, and lack of professional regulation of professional behavior. So, buyer beware. It's becoming let's hope families just smell something bad when they see it and are able to get support for helping colleges do the right thing.
This is just whetting our appetite and scratching the surface of something we have to come back to and talk about in depth. But, we've talked a lot about the challenge colleges have, whether it's demographic cliff, whether it is the cost of college and other alternatives out there, from Google recruiting people and badges and certificates, and certainly, particularly in conservative circles, just not seeing the value of college anymore. Like, those numbers are down drastically. Is college worth it? It wasn't even really challenged. Now, in many questionnaires, more than 50% of Republicans are saying it's not worth it. And so you're seeing a drop. So college attendance is down 2.5 million. And so what the combination of all these things is doing is it's making admission offices get way more aggressive. And so I'm hoping to be able to interview the folks from Denver, who came out with a guaranteed scholarship, basically, for ED.
Right.
And I know those guys; they're great guys in that office. They really are. The three leaders. I was on a fly-in there recently, but they were also honest when about the realities of how hard the job is. And so the harder the job gets, people go into survival mode. They're going to do aggressive things. And so it's funny, Susan, I was expecting to see incentives for ED immediately after that legislation. And I was surprised at how little I saw, but now it seems like the dam is breaking. And a lot of people, I see St. Olaf is out with the $20,000 guaranteed merit money, $20,000. Now, we know there were some people that were doing merit money for everybody, or Sinus was one, giving merit money for everybody before. So now before they were doing the thing of, make Johnny feel like he got this super great award and that would confer more honor on the acceptance. And then people may be more likely to take it. You got a financial benefit and everyone can say, my son got a scholarship. Now they're just being right up front with what they were already doing before anyway. But we know that these aggressive tactics come from a position of fierce competition. And in addition to all the other things, let's face it, the harder the marquee names get into, and we all experience this on the counselor side, the more people think, I need to throw more names in the hat. It's hard out there. Instead of people saying, I'll have a bigger portion of my list that's not in these low admit schools, they think, I'll do 20 or 25 and one of them's going to love me. And so that on the other end means your yield's going to go down. Because if a student that in the past, if you started this, they would apply to 4 or 5, and now they're doing 14 to 15, and 20 to 25 is not unusual. Certain percentage of those kids you're not going to get. So as yield goes down, people just get more aggressive. That's what I see this as, an outflow of more competition, more pressure, and especially for schools that are just in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, when it's like, if we don't bring people in, then we may not have a job. You're going to get aggressive. So I sort of see it somewhat as inevitable with the pressure everybody's under. I don't know. Julia, any thoughts on that? On anything? You can comment on either anything Susan said or anything I said, wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah, I always appreciate your optimism and your positive take.
That's what my kids say about me. They say, you always see the positive side.
You do. I just, to me, I guess I get awfully nervous. I do see, especially being a school-based counselor and watching 192 students get different treatment under the same process. It is bothersome to me. And then just these ED.
And Julia, can you explain what you mean by the different treatments so that everybody knows what you're talking about?
So for example, I will maybe have 50 students out of 192 who apply to University of Wisconsin. And that's a pretty straightforward process for them. However, for example, they have a different person that processes transcripts. And so one person processes one student transcript and they didn't bother to look at the context of Milton. The next person does that. Maybe they did look at the context, but interpreted differently. And so they distill a GPA for my students, and I will have very inconsistent answers. And when I call to check in, there's just no sort of ownership. For example, I'll have two students, one whose distilled GPA is maybe like a 3.8 and the other one's a 3.3. They went for the same major, even though Wisconsin says they don't admit by major. And one will get denied and the other one will get, and the person with the lower GPA will get admitted. And I'll call to ask. And while this is not maybe, I guess to me, I think it's so important if you're going to serve students that you need to really be thinking about consistency and sort of what it causes is a lot of confusion. And then a student thinks something went wrong with my application when it was human error on the college side.
Yeah, and that's crazy.
Yeah. And it just happens all this. I would say I'm regularly checking up with mid-sized to large colleges who have done something that does put the student in an unfair place that the student did not cause. My students, when they call to get information from NYU, for example, often get a confidently incorrect answer. I've had students waste thousands of dollars on, advice from admission officers that is not consistent with the policies of the college. I just had a college the other day say demonstrated interest. Every college measures it and you should be going to visit. And I had students who do not have the money to go purchase plane tickets do that under the advice of one admission officer. So I guess to me, and then these ED incentives drive me nuts because all we're doing is building that privileged class.
Right.
This is not about access or to me, it's not even about staying afloat. It's about staying afloat with the right people. And that by that, they mean wealthy, mostly white students. And so that to me is like very worrisome, right? So I understand that you are a business at the end of the day, but you have also made the choice to then only cater to a very certain subset of society.
Absolutely.
I wish we could go on and on this, but we're not good. I knew the three of us were dangerous.
Yes,
before you two were on the podcast, you both were interviewees, and you were my only 2-hour interviews forever until Julie and I interviewed Lee Coffin and went like forever. We had to turn it to a 7-parter. But Julia, you have something you want to talk about waitlists.
Yeah, I mean, and this is actually the good news about this session is that we're all frustrated with wait lists, we understand, and we all are confused as to the consistent spelling of waitlist. We also realized that in the sessions. Is it 2 words, 1 word? But the gist of it, so it was 2 school-based counselors and then 2 college-based folks, one from Occidental and one from University of Vermont. So a smaller sized college and then a mid-sized, large-sized college. And sort of the takeaway was that we need to kind of take out the madness and inconsistencies and sort of varying policies to try to get to a more equitable and clear sort of understanding of how waitlists work. The presenters did this lovely thing where they ranked their suggestions in order of spiciness. So in the sense that they realized it would probably be a huge culture shift to get, a college to fully change, their policy, like no more letters of interest, nothing is allowed. The student, opts into the wait list and that's all they can do, things like that. So sort of the idea was that I think the main takeaway was that counselors can work best with students, and also students that don't have counselors can work best with wait lists when there's just very clear communication from the college about here's how our wait lists work. We don't rank them, or if we do, this is how we do it. If we've got institutional priorities that might affect it, you have this finite time to respond to the wait list. And if you did want to set something different or something extra, like a letter of recommendation, please don't do that. Or yes, you can do that, but only in a certain time frame or through the portal and only 250 words. Can you say why you like this school? Things like, so the idea of just being a lot more clear, and it would be just sort of lovely if we could have a full-on agreement among every college, but I think that is a monumental shift that will never happen. But it's just sort of like the ED discussion we just had. The waitlist continues to sort of preference students that have these endpoints and certainly have money, because a lot of schools, I understand, don't have money for financial aid for students off of the wait list. But just being really clear with students so that way they're not sort of up at night wondering. And on the counselor side, that counselors need to be a lot more clear with students so that they're not also sort of yanking the chains of colleges and not allowing the colleges to really be thoughtful about their own wait list. So, joining every wait list or sending a letter and saying you're my first choice to every college, things like that. One of the proposals was that maybe, especially for school students who have a school-based counselor, is that you and your counselor decide you are allowed to commit to 2 wait lists and that's it. And one will be your first choice and the other one will be your second choice if you could get off. And that's all we're going to do. That's all, the only wait list we're going to work. We're going to send maybe a letter there to those 2 schools and that's it. You're going to get off the wait list for the rest of them.
Wait lists are really, truly the Wild Wild West. I mean, it's hard when you have thousands of schools that can have their own policy. I know that I really do appreciate when schools very explicitly say, this is what I want you to do. And some have even gone so far to say, it will only hurt you if you go beyond this. Yes. I so appreciate that, because the way families often act is, I know I can do something to make it happen. So do I need to get another letter? Do I need to show up again? And it's been really helpful when I can say, look at this wording. This is not going to help you, especially for these schools that don't go to wait lists very often. I think it would really do a lot to rein in expectations that people have. I think that the waitlist topic is one of the most complex ones because, like you said, people really, there's different advice coming from different schools.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think, families, especially at those schools that don't go to waitlist very often, I really appreciate anything to rein in expectations, because there's a person that I can go in and I can show common data set data and I can show, look, I remember one time, Julia, Haverford had a 3-year period where they showed 0 activity off the wait list. Now, that, we know that sometimes common data set's not completely always right, but so I'm not trying to say there wasn't some special circumstance here that didn't make it into the data pool, but there's a person I could show that to and they would be like, I get it. And then there's another one that will like, well, I can always be the first,
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
anything that can be done to rein in expectations would be great. We do have to move on to our last topic. Otherwise, we're gonna be in trouble with our. Well, we all have meetings coming up here in 20 minutes. But Susan, you have one more session that you found valuable. You want to share that, and we can have a little dialogue?
Yeah, well, I think the issue of the Supreme Court putting an end to consideration of race in admissions was on everybody's mind. There were a few things that, there were a few big monumental issues this year, but that's one that has really, everybody has rallied behind it. Whether you're school-based, college admissions, independent, vendor, the CBOs and access organizations, we are all behind how to manage this and continue to advocate for kids of color, first gen kids, kids that the system, particularly the political system in the United States, have basically left behind in a lot of ways, despite a lot of lip service. So the good news from my perspective was that there is an unwavering commitment and a loud commitment on the part of colleges to continue to work closely with schools, CBOs, the media, to get the word out there to these families that they are valued, there are places for them, and that they need to engage. They need to step into that space where the system can help them move forward toward college admission and affordability. Now, the issue is the concern that everybody has that families that already feel somewhat marginalized are going to pull away for fear of retribution or failure, or they don't have people like, the three of us urging them on, dispelling some of the mythology around what this all means. So we're waiting to see this year how colleges are going to manage their access programs, their fly-ins, their scholarships. The kids immediately said to me, my high school seniors immediately said to me, hey, the race question's still on the Common App, nothing's changed. And I said, well, the questions are there, but the colleges are not going to be seeing the answer to that question. They're going to be reading your narratives. That's what they've been told by the Supreme Court, that they continue to read student narratives, assess the influence of race, gender, socioeconomic status, parents' education, you name it. But those questions are going to be suppressed. A lot of questions are suppressed. Actually, kids don't realize this, but a lot of colleges don't see the military question, the parent educational background question, the religion question. They collect all that information. College Common App collects it. And then the colleges want to collect it because they want to track what the next few years is going to look like for populations of students who identify as other than white. So there's, I think, some positive momentum that, but we're the choir, the people who go to conferences like NACAC, we're preaching to ourselves, and we're already in the know and high-minded with, hopefully. But I think we all in the profession have to work with whatever people we have in our sphere of influence to make sure these families understand that they are valued. Their stories are more important now than ever before. This isn't going to be just an issue of saying, hey, look at me, by the way, I'm a student of color. It's going to be an introspective reflection, which has actually been the first Common App essay prompt for many years. Many years. That's not new. Asking for students to write about their identity. What is the part of you that colleges need to know about, or they're not going to really know who you are? So I would say some optimism, although for those of us who had a chance to see Eric Hoover's article yesterday in the Chronicle, and he was at NACAC, and he's deeply, deeply involved in this conversation from all angles, saying that colleges they don't want a target on their backs. And what they say professionally to the likes of us may be very different from the messaging that their attorneys are cautioning them about, because they don't want to be the Students for Fair Admissions lawsuit of the year when Ed Blum starts going after some colleges for not attending to the Supreme Court decision.
I'm sitting here listening to Susan, and realize it is gotta be really, really hard being an applicant to college right now, given all of the complexity. I mean, just think about the test optional issue. Should I submit scores or not submit scores? Mm-hmm. There are schools that are saying, if you're in our middle 50%, submit them. And then there are other schools that are saying, if you're not at the median score, don't submit. There's schools that are telling people very explicitly. I mean, Stevens last year, Institute of Technology, said, if you don't have a 1400, and they said it 3 times, don't send your scores. And I had a student that got a 1393 times, by the way. It drove him crazy, and then there's others that say, well, do you think your scores reflect your intelligence? That's up to you. Now, I preface that when I think about this issue, I mean, I am trying my hardest to capture the nuance in this podcast, but here's just 3 different responses, and I reported on this, but some may not have heard it. So when I attended the session that had Rice and Pomona, WashU, Emory, and Cornell, I'm not going to say who said it because I don't think they would want me to, but one of the schools said that I'm an attorney, and all that decision said was that we can't go by box checking. That's all it said. And guess what? We never did that before anyway. Right. So basically they were saying nothing has changed. Then at the time, Julie and I interviewed Lee Coffin. He had been prohibited from talking about this at all by his general counsel. He said, Mark, Julia, I cannot talk about affirmative. This is before the decision came out. We talked a little bit off air, but it's nothing. But I heard him more recently on his podcast say that he was a little surprised that the Supreme Court gave them a lifeline. And his interpretation of the decision is, just because we can't give you credit because you say I'm a Black kid who grew up in the Bronx. But if you talk about how your race has impacted your experience, we can consider that. We need to now know how your experience has been impacted by your background. So there's a different position. And then I visited Clemson a week or so ago. I had a chance to sit down for an hour with a representative. And she said, because of the Supreme Court, we're not even allowed to talk about race at all. Not in committee, nothing at all. So it's a complete non-factor. So you sort of have 3 schools taking 3 different positions. No wonder you combine that with just, should I submit and should I not submit? No wonder people are like pulling their hair out and finding this process. And then what Julia said about wait lists, and then we could go into ED. Like, every one of these is challenging for us as professionals in this experience who've worked with hundreds and thousands of kids, for us to figure out, well, this school is here, this school is here. Like, what is the public supposed to do just coming in? It's a difficult time, I think, to be a parent and to be an applicant. Julia, I've been talking a lot. Any thoughts at all? As
you know, this whole thing is just so disheartening for me, and it's sort of, when I'm talking to my students about, like, my BIPOC students or first gen students are so aware of this and are feeling like they're having to state the obvious. Like, it is, yes, my race has affected. Why do I have to explain my adversity and trauma to you? That should just be understood. If I'm applying to a predominantly white institution and you don't understand how my race or my gender or my socioeconomics has affected me without me having to sort of spell that out for you, it's just been really disheartening. In some ways, it's been great for students to kind of express some things that they might have expressed anyways, but it just, it doesn't put a lot of, I'll say this too, it does not put a lot of trust in our profession from families who have always felt like this process was never meant for them. And this is just proof of it. So it's just been sort of really disheartening for me. But I will say one silver lining has been, as Susan said, the colleges really, it appears as if they are trying, right? I think that I am probably being naive here. But our fly-in programs are still on at colleges. There is in my college fairs with the reps that have come, they've really been really eager to talk to our prep 9 kids or our students from underrepresented areas. And so I'm just really hopeful that I'm not super naive here, but I think I probably am. And I think we don't know yet, but we will find out. But I do believe the consensus among enrollment leaders is that they will get sued. This will happen. And so I can't imagine that all this good faith effort is actually going to play out the way I think it will.
Well, I have really enjoyed this, but my appetite was just wet. I feel like I went to this really amazing restaurant that's incredible. These, award-winning chefs, and all I got was just this little small appetizer. And then I'm like a doctor on call. And then I got signaled and I had to run out of the restaurant. And I know how good it would have been if I could have had that 5-course meal. So I love talking with you guys. I wish we could have had more time to go into more detail. We'll have to maybe make it an annual NACAC review group session or something, find a way to reconvene again, because I've loved this and only wish we had more time. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Lisa, we have a question. What do we want? We should start giving nicknames to people when we don't have names, like French girl,
That is dangerous, Mark. We will not be doing that.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Put down.
Well, the reason I got that idea is when Julie and I are doing a question a little while ago, we nicknamed somebody Upstate New York, only to get to the end to find out that was another person that was Upstate New York.
Exactly.
We called them Upstate New York the whole time.
I heard that. See, trouble already. And if we just make up nicknames like, anonymous kangaroo or something.
No, I didn't say I was going to call somebody a kangaroo. We don't have to go there.
Who knows who you just offended?
That's
what
true.
I'm saying?
What if they hate New York? You never know.
Exactly.
We'll play it safe. We'll play it safe. All right, listeners. So I don't know if Lisa and I completely agree on this. We might disagree a little bit on this one. Maybe not. So.
Hi. My question is, my child will have taken all French classes her high school offers by the end of her junior year. When looking at options for her to take another year of French outside of the high school, I am wondering if she should simply take the course pass-fail to simply take stress off of her, as it will be her senior year applying to colleges, and she'll still take a complete high school load of courses. Also, the outside GPA won't be considered in her high school transcript or high school GPA. Or, since she is taking the course anyway, should she just take it for a grade? Any input you have would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Do you want to share your thoughts and I'll share mine?
Oh, I think when we were talking in the pre-show, I don't have strong feelings on this either way. I think, Mark was going to go with a it depends answer,
Sure.
Which is probably not surprising to anyone. I completely agree with that. I guess I think in an ideal world, it'd be nice if you could get a nice grade in your class, if that's possible and you don't lose sleep and it's not driving you nuts. Because I think it would be impressive to admissions officers to look at that. But, I don't think if you don't, I don't think it's going to be like that fatal, nail in the coffin of your denial from that school.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I agree 100%. Because my initial thought, because of the fact that it's like, should I take it pass fail? I thought that, okay, I'm sensing some concerns about work overload here, was what I was picking up. And so that's what I was thinking, like, only you know what you can handle without, not getting sleep. Your mental health goes down, your grades in other classes go down, high school year is miserable. To me, it's not worth trying to get a grade just for that. The fact that it's going to be something that you can list that you took and that you've already taken everything at your school anyway, you're already going above and beyond. And that's already showing a level of intellectual curiosity and pursuit of knowledge that's going to be way more than what most people do. So I absolutely think it's a great thing to do. I know colleges like it when students do this, when their curriculum is maxed out and they seek out online opportunities to go take additional things. That's something that, many an admission officer has shared that. So, that can also be a really good way to show a passion in a topic. If, identify an area of interest and you pursue it beyond what the school offers. In fact, sometimes I think, Lisa, this is where my thinking has changed a little bit. And I think from some of the conversations I've had with Susan, where I think she would agree with me on this. The classic wisdom in the past has been schools are going to look at you through the context of what's offered at your school. And, they're not going to hold you responsible for anything that your school hasn't offered. And they're going to see it through that context. And while that is still true, more and more and more in competitive applicant pools, people are availing themselves of things that are, courses that are out there. And I don't want to speak for Susan because she's not here, but we have had a conversation about this. Like it's really competitive in certain places, and sometimes just not taking stuff, it doesn't always cut it when your competition is going and seeking some things out and doing some coursework on, because there's never been more availability than there is now for resources other than just what your school has to offer. And this is something I find a lot of people bring up with me, like to me, like should I take these online courses because my school's not offering XYZ? So I do feel it's impressive in and of itself, especially because she's not talking about should I take French 101?
Right. No, she's, doing advanced French and showing initiative.
Yeah, and presumably there's probably a track record of grades and maybe good grades. I don't know, but there may be, for what she's taken so far. So my whole thing really was just don't take on more than you can handle. And if that means taking it off pass fail, you know what? Just the fact that you're taking the course in and of itself is impressive. And I wouldn't be concerned about it not going into the GPA. I think that one of the biggest misperceptions people have is, I don't think people realize sort of how fungible GPA is. And GPA is just, people think that GPA is sort of this magical number. They'll throw it out like I've got a certain GPA. Someone tells me their GPA, it means almost nothing to me. Say it means nothing.
Right. I mean, like unless it's like a 1.6.
Right. I know that a 3.9 is better than a 1.9, right? So I know that, but I don't know what your grading scale is, at your school, especially weighted, unweighted. If we're talking weighted, I don't know how much weight is going in. I also don't know how much grade inflation exists. And when I say grading scale, like I'm not even talking about like bonus points for weightings. I don't know if it's a 5.0 is the highest grade or whatever. So
like 100-point scale.
Yeah.
Is it I
was looking at a crazy one the other day. I was like, geez, let me get this school profile and go see what's going on here. So so the GPA thing, I don't really see that. I mean, obviously, would I say getting a high grade is better than pass fail generally? Yeah. But in this case, you're so far going above and beyond. My biggest advice would be,
it's not a huge
my biggest advice would be, what your limits are. And whether this is going to have a deleterious negative effect on you in other areas, and it's just not worth it. And I think, you're in a better place to be able to judge that than I am as a podcaster who doesn't know your situation. See how I said podcaster? Just so, see how I threw that little pejorative tone in there on that one?
Oh my goodness. I didn't know that those were bad. Yeah. But, and I think too, like some college classes, you can decide at a certain point whether or not you want to take a pass fail. So, I mean, the student might, if that's the case, see how it goes. And if it looks like it's really easy and he or she is breezing through it, then yay, let's get that grade. But if not, then that would be the time to, I think press the easy button and just do pass fail and, still learn your French.
That's a good point. Like you might not have to make that decision up front. You might have an option, depending on how the school is structured, of making that call a few weeks in. So that would be, it's certainly worth looking into. Do you have to declare that up front, or do you have an option? These are things. Now, you're talking about things that are different. This is going to vary so much in terms of policies, because some places will let you make that decision, fairly a ways into the course, and then some, you got to declare. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that would be a great thing to talk about more at some other point about this sort of, more and more people are doing more and more things that are outside of what their school offers in order to raise their chances of admission at, highly selective college. It seems a little bit like an arms race in some kind of way. But I mean, I just think it'd be interesting to talk about sort of the pros and cons and sort of what are some of the consequences of that for schools and also for kids.
Yeah. No. I think absolutely. I think that's an important topic that and many others we see. This is why, sometimes people say to me, how are you doing a podcast for 8 to 6.5 years, twice a week? Like, don't you run out of content? I'm like, no. There's always something going on in the news. We're never going to run out of in the news things. People have unlimited questions. We're never going to run out of that. Yeah. We'll just scratch the surface of the interviews and interviewees that we could get to, and we'll never get to all the colleges. So we've got enough content for 5 lifetimes.
Yeah, and let's face it, all the co-hosts on this show, we all have some strong opinions, and we like to talk about them. So that takes hours and hours a week alone, I feel like.
Most admissions folk are kind of chatterboxes. I'm probably the extreme, but we all have no problem like talking a little bit here or there. That's usually one of the things you do when you go into counseling or admissions, whatever side of the desk you're on. Like you like talking about this stuff and talking to kids. So we'll have to file that one away, but I almost gave a nickname after you told me, and I caught myself. I was going to say, thanks, French girl.
Oh, you cannot do that, Mark. You cannot do that.
Can I say French person? French?
No. You can just say au revoir to this wonderful, ask her, and please send us your address so we can send you Elliot Felix's wonderful book.
Yes, we definitely do. We definitely need to send you Elliot Felix's book, How to Get the Most Out of College, 127 Ways to Make Connections, Make It Work for You, and Make a Difference. And that's our gift for the first 20 people since we started doing that. And we get that book, and then after that, we will be transitioning. These are all people Lisa interviewed.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we got another 20 books lined up when we run out of these. And then now we got to start going and recruiting another 20 books. I have some people in mind, so we'll talk about that offline.
All right. Yeah, that awesome. Sounds great. Well, bon chance, I believe. Bon chance to our listener. And
you go to Montreal. Now you're starting to show off. One weekend.
Yeah, that's like really. Yeah, no. I took maybe 2 quarters of French at the U of C because I was bored, and it didn't go that well. I probably should have taken that pass-fail is all I have to say.
Well, my 2 lowest grades ever in high school were French and chemistry. And my dad was a chemistry teacher. How bad is that?
Oh, that's bad.
Terrible. Terrible. He's a chemistry teacher. He was an assistant principal, but he was also a chemistry teacher. But chemistry and me just did not work well together. Biology, yes. History, my fave. That was absolutely love me some history, especially when you get a good teacher.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny chemistry class story that I will make very brief. So my brother and I went to Lafayette High School in Wildwood, Missouri, and we both had the same chemistry teacher who was the football coach. And we both did not do well in chemistry. I did pretty good the first semester because for some reason I was seated behind a pillar and couldn't see anything he was talking about in lecture. So I just read the book and I got an A. But then they changed our seats. And so I was in the front row and I started listening to him and I started getting C's. And so finally I had to pay the kid who had the seat behind the pillar $20 to trade with me.
$20 to get like a lot back in the day.
It was. I was really desperate. And so, I made it out of there. But then years later, my brother's son had the same teacher for chemistry. And this is a brilliant kid. And he had the same problem. So I'm like, you got to stop listening to him. Don't listen to him. Put in some earphones during the lectures or whatever. And then he started reading the books. And he started getting A's again.
Well, I remember thinking, why am I having to memorize this periodic table? Like, how is this going to help me in life?
Well, if you build bombs or something like that, it's helpful.
Kaczynski or somebody.
That's exploding. Okay, good to know. But for what you and I do, it's probably best that we don't know a lot about chemistry because we would just mess it up, and the consequences are big.
I just realized we went from French girl to chemistry blowing up. We're a little out of control today. We better call it.
That's what happens when you do these recordings
late
at night.
This one is north of 10 o'clock, which is
Yeah.
Which is usually when Lisa's ready to conk out on me,
That's right. And I should go now because I'll just get crazier as the night goes
Well,
on.
thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Take care.
All right.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, before I start, I want to point out something that Ron Lieber said earlier in the interview, and it's been bothering me that I never did an insert right at the time, but I want to go ahead and insert something now. So Ron made a statement that early decision is not binding. I just want to point out that this represents an outlier view that is outside of the mainstream, and it's not how most college admission officers would describe early decision. Most would say it's not legally binding. You can't throw somebody in jail, but it is morally binding. I like how Ron Lieber is an independent thinker with a lot of passion, and I like to give people exposure to our guests and give them the freedom to express non-traditional views. But I don't want someone to say, early decision is not binding. I heard that on your college-bound kid. Friends, in this final part of what's been a 4-part interview with Ron Lieber, Ron and I discuss, is it worth it to pay top dollar for an elite college? Ron discusses the power of the regional network that certain state schools have. Ron discusses a new initiative he is launching to help families find merit scholarship money. And Ron goes on the hot seat in the lightning round, and he does not disappoint. You're not going to want to miss it. Listen and enjoy.
I had somebody say to me when I was doing the reporting for this book, somebody who was a dean at a very nice school, I'd say within 300 miles of where you live there in Atlanta. He was interested in what I was doing in my reporting, and he sort of sized it all up, and he sort of leaned back in his chair, and he thought about his 10th grader and his 8th grader, and he sort of fixes me with the gaze, and he said, well, what else am I going to spend the money on? And that is not a rhetorical question, right? And for so many of us, we feel emotionally compelled to spend close to whatever the asking price is for our precious humans who we want to launch into the stratosphere, right? And there's nothing else that we want to spend money on or spend this much money on. And if it means we're retiring at 73 instead of 67, well, so be it. These are our kids. And the marketplace and the people who set the prices and tune those algorithms, they understand that.
Yeah, and I see it as a counselor all the time. I will pay X amount for this, but for this, and I'm talking about decisions you could really question as being, is this financially prudent? Like I got to know a fair amount about your finances. How are you going to swing 80 to 90, after taxes? But the mindset is oftentimes, I'm being a bad parent if I don't give my kid what they want, which I push back on, but that's oftentimes the mindset. And unfortunately, sometimes the mindset, in my opinion, well, there's different things. There's the status aspect of the bragging rights with the parents and all of that, which is very real. And I think people are oftentimes in denial of that, the bumper sticker and all of that. But oftentimes I think people think the college degree is an elixir and the Red Sea's part if you go to certain schools. I was just having a conversation with the family I'm working with. And mom went to Harvard undergrad and doctor. And she said, you know what? It was tough. And I did not get in Harvard med school. I did not have the grades for that. Maybe I would have been better off going somewhere because there's number one in my class coming out of high school. Maybe I would have been better off going somewhere where I crushed it, and maybe I went to a place like that. But I thought I'm at Harvard. That's going to help me with Harvard Med, and that's oftentimes a big fallacy out there that going to an elite school makes it so much easier. I'm not saying there's not an incremental difference. I'm not saying that all grad schools look at all undergrads as the same, but they're not going to take your 3.3 at Williams or Pomona or, Stanford and leap you over the kid with the 3.9 at State U for competitive grad school. They're just not. And I think sometimes there's a disillusionment, but it's so tricky, right? Because you could argue financial services, management consulting, white shoe law firms. Like I can get the ROI back for certain jobs and certain professions and justify the investment, but maybe not for certain other majors or certain locations. So the whole question is so complex for me as a counselor, but I find in general, the perception is no matter what I have to pay, I'm going to see the ROI financially even. And sometimes I think that's really questionable. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Well, it depends on what you think college is for, right? I mean, at the front end, I try to pin people down on the question of what it is that you think you're buying, and I spent a couple of years lapping the country when I was writing The Price You Pay for College, asking people like, what is the point of the exercise here, right? Like, what is the definition of success and how much is enough? And inevitably, I heard one of three things, right? You're paying for the education, you're paying for the kinship, right? The people, the peers, and the mentors who will kind of pick you up and carry you through life. And you're paying for the credential, right? And the credential might help you get a solid foothold, in the middle class or the upper middle class in a way that your parent or parents couldn't. Or it might be the kind of gold-plated credential that, can open the door on Wall Street, in a way that, your mediocre state university might not, right? You're appealing to the snobs and the elitists, even if you're not one yourself. And it is, I make no judgment about anybody who is trying to buy their kids prestige above all else. There are plenty of families of color I've talked to who have said, I want to build a discrimination moat around my child so that nobody who's ever looking at them in the future, has any extra reason to doubt them, right? So I'm going to pay up, for, the 80 grand instead of the 35 grand at the state university so that they can have that gold-plated degree, so that they can know that my kid, can cut it there in case they're inclined to discriminate them. Or if you're trying to appeal the snobs and the elitists, like no matter the color of your skin, that like down on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, where they're giving out, $1 million venture capital checks that, when I wrote the book, I looked at Y Combinator, which is a really well-known and well thought of kind of incubator for startups. And, some ridiculous percentage of the people who had gone through there in the previous 5 years had come from, one of 10 schools. And so, look, I get it. I'm not passing any judgment, but it is certainly the case, as you suggested, that plenty of people are paying more than they need to and more than they ought to. And I'm just trying to get people to ask better questions of themselves and then ask better questions of the institutions. I'm not saying what the right answers are. I just want people to ask better questions, and I want the schools to give clearer answers.
No, it's a really tough question. And I'm going to date myself with this example, but I used to work at the Westtown School, a Quaker boarding school outside of Philly. And I remember we had Kurt was our Penn recruiter who came through, and he was also an alum. And I remember him asking, he's doing an information session with the students, and he said, why should you pay $46,000 to come here? This is where I'm dating myself, right? Now it's almost double. Why should you pay $46,000 to come to Penn and study biology when you can go to the University of Phoenix? Why should you do it? He asked everybody to go around and give all their reviews and everything. And then his perspective, you do it because when you get out, you can pick up the phone and call somebody, and you're in the network and all the blah, 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 all the opportunities that come because of who you meet when you're there and the network that it opens up to you. And, I've thought about that a lot. And part of what I thought is, your ability to build your network depends a lot on your networking skills too. Because I talked to a couple students that I worked with some time ago. They'd been out of college a decade. They both went to two of the most prestigious Ivy League schools in the country, and both had gone into financial services, private equity, venture capital and investment banking. And one of them said to me that the network I've gotten has been incredible. But then he said, but you know what? I've seen other kids use their state flagship network very well, too. So to me, it's more about your networking skills. I'm not saying that I haven't had certain advantages in some circles, because I feel I have, but I've seen some kids use their public school network better than some of my colleagues use their Ivy League network. So all of these situations, all of these conversations about money, they're just complex. They're complex.
They are, right? And, people in the North look down their noses at, I don't know, just to pick a school at random, Auburn University, right? But that's a school with a really strong culture, right? And, those Auburn alumni are helping the other Auburn alumni out. Now, some of this is regional, right?
Sure.
Most of those grads are, staying south of the Mason-Dixon line when they finish up. And so, much of it depends on where you are and where you think you might want to be, which is complex, right? Because we're supposed to know what these 17 and 18-year-olds are actually going to want to do and where they're going to want to do it, right? It's pretty hard to sort of stake, $100,000 or $400,000 on the potentially ever-changing desires of a teenager. I mean, that's one of many things that's wrong with the process, right? I mean, these kids shouldn't be going to college until they're 20. We have that wrong too, but that's not something we can solve for here today.
No, well said.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
This is Linda with this week's recommended resource, the newsletter Next from Jeffery Selingo. Selingo is a leading authority in higher education. He's the author of Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions, co-hosts the Future You podcast, and previously served as editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education, all of which are previous recommended resources. He's a special advisor for innovation at Arizona State University, where he is also the founding director of the Academy for Innovative Higher Education Leadership. Given his extensive background in higher ed, his newsletter, Next, is a treasure trove of insights. It delves into innovation, admissions, and the student experience, offering a unique perspective from a seasoned industry expert. To get Next delivered to your inbox, visit jeffselingo.com/next-newsletter.
I want to ask you a question about merit money, and then we'll transition to the lightning round. So as the cost of college rises, the more merit money becomes important. You've talked about that in our interview already. But it's hard to know for a family how much merit money they can get from a college. And you're very much aware of that, Ron. I know we talked before we came on here live about this. We know how many questions you get from your listeners about this as you travel around and speak in response to your book. And you've decided to do something about this to address this issue. And I really want you to take the time to talk about a new exciting initiative that you're one of the ones who's at the fulcrum of it. Why don't you talk about it? Because I think it's something our listeners are going to love.
Sure. Thank you. So one of the things that was surprising for me when I wrote The Price You Pay for College, and it came out in 2021, was that there were a lot of people who wrote to me who were really angry. I didn't expect to or desire to inspire anger, but people were angry that the pricing systems were so opaque, and that there was this sort of, kind of hidden system of discounts, often for very affluent people, that was a kind of, hidden curriculum that nobody ever teaches. And, I don't blame college counselors for not having the knowledge, inside of schools. They often don't have the time at public school to be a kind of quasi-financial aid officer. At private schools, it can be a little more delicate. The parent or the parents don't necessarily want to be grilled on their, ability to pay or their willingness to pay. And so people just didn't understand how this merit stuff worked. So I decided to build a course. I spent the last couple of years working on an online course that's just come out. People can find it at meritaidcourse.com. And it's designed to kind of pull back the curtain on the way all of this works. Like, why did Merit Aid come about in the first place? What are all the different ways and the different types of schools that use it, from High Point to Ursinus to the University of Alabama? How can people use a few simple tools, data that's kind of hiding in plain sight, but that most families never know about, and many counselors never see either, to begin to get a sense of, how much merit aid they might get, essentially how they can shop smarter. And then when the offers come in, have a reasonable conversation with the institution about whether there might be just a little bit more. And, a number of readers wrote to me after reading my book and said, we got $15,000 or $20,000 more out of the school because we did the stuff that you told us to do. And I figured, all right, well, not everybody's going to find my book. Maybe if I did a course, people could find the information that way and achieve the same result. So I'm pretty excited about it.
No, you should be. So when you think of the course, do you see this as best for counselors, parents, students, all the above? And who is it ideally geared toward?
If you're a counselor and you feel like you don't know as much as you would like to, and you're getting more and more questions about Merit Aid, this can help you. But I think it's, helpful in particular for families who just really want to go deep and want to understand exactly how the system works. Because once you do understand it, it may actually change the way you shop. It may change the way your kid applies, and it could definitely swing the final price by tens of thousands of dollars from what you originally thought you might pay.
So it's a course. Is this like somebody signs up and they see a series of videos? Is that kind of how it works? And how much time would it take for somebody to go all the way through through the whole course? And last question, what's the pricing model?
Yeah, so it's 10 or 15 video modules. It lasts a couple of hours. You can do it in chunks. There's some exercises. I pulled some data in, that may be useful that people can download. And so yeah, it's about 2.5 hours. The cost is $299 to do the whole thing. You can come back whenever you want and reaccess it. And if you want to pay less, you can sign up for my email list at ronlieber.com. I'm going to be offering a pretty hefty discount upon launch to folks who were part of that list.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. You ready for the lightning round?
Let's do it.
What do you do for fun? How do you unwind? How do you, chill when you're not working?
I picked up a marathoning habit when I turned 50, and I'm
at
training.
50, that's pretty good.
At 50, yeah. Nearly anyone.
How many miles are you doing?
I did the half marathon this weekend. So,
Wow.
I'm getting ready for the New York City Marathon in November. So the mileage ramps up. I'll run 20 miles, at peak, and then kind of taper down, and then do the 26 the first weekend in November. So, as I like to say, nearly anyone can do nearly anything as long as you do it slowly enough. Because I am slow, it's a lot of time putting those miles in. So that's a lot of the spare time right now.
Are you enjoying it?
I love that I am able to do it. And I love the feeling of having done it. There are times, when I don't want to do it at 6 a.m, particularly when it's hot. But I love that I am able to do it. I am not a natural athlete, and the fact that I'm out there slogging it out makes me feel good about myself.
Central Park? Where's your running routine?
I live in Brooklyn. Central Park is for tourists.
Yeah.
It's completely overrun.
Sure.
All the elbows and the the bankers and I run in Prospect Park in Brooklyn.
Nice.
I run in the industrial areas of Red Hook, and I run down Ocean Parkway to Coney Island, and then kind of up and down the boardwalk area there, and then back up again for my long runs.
Well, that was a good one. Well, besides completing a marathon, what else is on the bucket list?
Oh, wow. The bucket list. That's such a great question. I mean, there are places on the globe that I haven't been to that I'd like to go. But in terms of like big, crazy things that I haven't actually tried yet, well, I'd like to run the marathon in North Korea.
And why
They
there?
before the pandemic, at least they used to do one because there's no other way to get in
Oh.
as an American. Now, they're in the habit of occasionally sort of plucking people and keeping them over there. My wife is not at all interested in this.
You might have a new book, Not the Price You Pay for College, the price you pay to be a
Yeah,
marathon runner.
yeah. So that's on the list. But I don't know. I feel like I've been pretty lucky. As we discussed at the beginning, there was a while there where my family didn't have a lot of extra money for us to do the things that we wanted, and because I'm a system beater, I have a lot of frequent flyer miles. I've been able to, go to a lot of places on the globe that I haven't been yet. I'd like to explore some of those really crazy caves that they just started exploring in Vietnam in the last 10 or 20 years. You have to sort of rappel into them. If this isn't familiar, you can Google New Vietnam caves. I think that'll do it. And then hit the image button and you'll see all sorts of amazing stuff. I want to go do that.
Good stuff. So you can't be a writer. You need to make your livelihood some other way. What's appealing to you?
I would be interested in being a financial planner.
Oh, why am I not surprised?
Yeah. I have often thought that it would be really rewarding to be a financial aid counselor at a community college
Good for
or
you.
at one of the city colleges. So those are the two that come to mind.
Big difference on the pay between the two.
Big difference. Yeah. I've always been fascinated by the travel industry, and I think it would be fun to be I think it'd be super interesting to be a flight attendant. I've always wanted to get my pilot license, but
wow.
there's not a suitable airport to do that. That's less than 2 hours away.
You're an adventuresome guy, or do you also jump out of airplanes and parachute and do all that stuff too?
Oh, I definitely want to try that. Yeah, I have not done skydiving yet, but I would like to try it. I'm a little worried that if you hit the ground hard enough, you sprain your ankle, and that's like not compatible with marathoning. So I got to wait until my marathon days are done.
Besides your book, what's a book that you would recommend listeners listen to? And it could be on anything. You could stay in the money realm, you could stay in the college realm, or you could go, you can even go into the novel realm. It can be anything. You can take that where you want to go.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend a novel that I just finished listening to. It's called Groundskeeping. It came out a year or two ago, and it is set at a small liberal arts college, and it's about a romance between, a visiting writer, adjunct professor who's relatively young, and somebody on the buildings and grounds staff who wants to be a writer. And the thing that I like about it is that there's not enough really great writing out there about social class and social class difference. And this is a novel that is very much rooted in the social class differences between these two main characters. And the writing is lovely, it's understated, and it is completely illuminating, and makes you uncomfortable about wherever you sit on the sort of social class stratum. I think it makes you think about how you think about people who are above you and below you. So Groundskeeping.
Love it. Love it. So last question is your advice for a parent or a student related to college. Or you can go life if you want.
I think the best advice I can offer is to sit down well ahead of time and ask big, expansive questions about the why of college. Because, we've come to see it, the residential undergraduate education at the age of 18 as, an expectation kind of, bordering on entitlement for, the middle class or the upper middle class and above. And we haven't really stopped to ask ourselves, right? Like, what is it about our values as a nation or our values as a family that make it so? And how much value do we assign or ascribe to the experience? And how should that affect what we're willing to budget or pay or borrow, right? What is the point of the exercise? What are we trying to get out of it? And what does our teenager think they're getting out of it? And if you can come to agreement on that, you can kind of set the search against those values that you have agreed on as a family. And values minus S is value.
Right? I like that.
And at that point, maybe it's easier to figure out what's worth paying for and what is not.
Ron, this has been fantastic. You've been most generous with your time, giving us an hour and a half. I know you're a really busy guy. There's a lot you can do in 90 minutes. Really thank you for coming on. If you, in closing, one more time could, first of all, I don't even know if we've mentioned the name of your book in this interview, and a lot of people will be familiar, but there certainly will be some that are not. We get new listeners every week. Mention your book, mention your course one more time, and mention just how people could follow you, either your Times column in New York Times or social media. Just if people are kind of like, I kind of like this guy, and I think I want to hear his voice a little more. How do you want to direct him?
Thank you for asking. So my book is called The Price You Pay for College, available wherever books are sold, especially at your local independent bookstore. If they don't have it, they can order it, just like Amazon can. And my course you can find at meritaidcourse.com. My day job is at the New York Times, where I write the Your Money column. You can find me there at nytimes.com/Lieber. And somewhere in that bio is a link to my email, but my personal website is ronlieber.com, and it's easy to send me a note from there. I'm on all the social media places that you would expect to find me on. I'm spending way less time on Twitter these days.
Sure, you and me both. And just so you know, listeners, that's Lieber, Lieber. So thank you so much, Ron. And I look forward to keeping in touch with you and supporting your work in any way that I can. It really means a lot to me that you came on our podcast.
It's been a total pleasure. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
Take care. Have a good one. Friends, on Monday's episode, there's a whole new income-driven repayment plan out there for those who have student loans, and it's known as the SAVE plan, and it is significantly better than any previous income-driven plan. And I want to make sure that you have a deep understanding of it, because it really may impact your decision when it comes to borrowing for college. And we'll also have the final part of Lisa's interview with Dr. Eric Newble from East Carolina State, the Associate Vice Chancellor. And they're talking about the importance of student engagement. And friends, you're going to hear an interview from me next. In fact, it's next Monday it'll start. And toward the end of that interview, I ask our interviewee the question. I say, you're a real expert in your field. Have you found certain colleges that you feel produce really great graduates when it comes to your area of expertise? And our thought leader responded and said, it's not really about that. I'm hiring more higher level and mid-level people, and I want to know what you've done in the track record of your career. I find there's people that are amazing hires that went to no-name universities and amazing hires that went to brand-name universities. It's not about where you went to school. It's about what you've done over the last 20 years. And it was like music in my ears, because it was echoing one of the themes of this podcast. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there, what you do when you get out of there. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.